Welcome to Ascended Warrior, Soul Codes for a Shifting World. This is your sacred space to awaken, align, and rise in your purpose. So let's begin. Hello again. Welcome back to Ascended Warrior. I am your host, Chris Alicia, and this is the third of the three-part series into war consciousness. In the first episode, we talked about battlefield consciousness and why war still exists in a world that feels like it's really evolved past men running at other men on a battlefield. In the last episode, we talked about the war in Gaza and the holy wounds that have been generated in that land since its inception, since humans started this incarnation cycle. In this episode, we're going to talk about a very different type of war, although all wars do have similar karmic structures. Diving into the Ukraine war, the purposes behind it and the messages that are coming from this war are very different. Where the war in Gaza speaks very much about the ascension of the religious organizations that have ties to that area and the collective consciousness of being sovereign beings, not us versus them. The Ukraine war has that in several different ways, not necessarily the holy wounds, but the us versus them mentality. So we're going to dive into that today. I've done a card reading on it in the past, and the results were actually really enlightening. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you today. But before we begin, as always, I want to ground into heart space so that we can hear and receive this information from higher consciousness and not just the physical sense. When we listen as Chris, we're hearing with our senses, with our human senses. I want you to hear this information from a higher sense, from a higher consciousness, from your soul, from your higher heart, your higher self, whatever it is that you call it, not your human senses. And I tap into my heart as well so that I can bring in information, I can channel in information in real time for you. And you'll see Spirit correct me in real time when I say something that they don't agree with. So with that being said, just feel the surface beneath your body. Allow your body just to relax. You can keep your eyes open. Take a deep breath in and let it out. Just releasing all tension from the body, settling into this space and just slowing down that mind chatter. Now visualize your heart space right above your chest. This heart chakra begin to open and spin, becoming more vibrant and clear with each bit of movement. We ground into this heart space. We're going to listen through our heart, and we are here to receive guidance from Spirit and our higher consciousness. That already feels better. So before I even researched the history of Ukraine and Russia, and I do that for everything, I like to look at these topics from many different lenses. I channel information, so I'll go into meditation and I'll ask if there is information on the topic. And I share that. I bring in cards, oracle cards, angel cards, and I ask if there's information to help bring understanding of the soul purpose for why things are happening, for the spiritual purpose behind things. But then I also want to understand the karmic ties. And I get that mostly through just reading up on the history of these places. Talking about Gaza and the different religious entities that felt called to that land because of its natural power. Ukraine and Russia, well, they don't have those energy ley lines underneath that's called to humans, they do have a shared identity, a shared past. And when I pulled the cards, before I even looked at the history, I pulled this beautiful blue card, and it was the colors of Ukraine, which I think are wonderful. And what this card is showing is that Ukraine and Russia are on the same karmic cycle. They agreed once upon a time to go through the ascension process together, meaning that for Ukraine as a country, as a collective consciousness, to ascend, to get past war consciousness, to move into peace and awakening and evolution, whatever comes next for them, Russia needs to be willing to do it as well. They are mirroring countries, they're mirroring entities that have made a karmic agreement to move through the cycle together, which is really fascinating. So they were originally the same place. I looked in the history and it said between the 9th and 13th century, the birthplace of what was then Kievan Rus was created, which encompassed Ukraine, Russia, and several of the other now sovereign nations in that area. They were under Soviet rule until 1991. That is very young when you think of souls, when you think of countries evolving. Ukraine is a very young country, but it has those ancient ties to Russia's evolution. It was tied to its creation, its founding. The souls that went there were tied to the same karmic cycle, the same opportunities for growth that came from living in that area and facing emperors and Soviet Union and USSR and all of those cycles that it's had. Those souls who agreed to come in those areas were getting the same opportunities for growth. So it makes a lot of sense that this card would come up showing that their karmic circle is tied. Now, it does talk about the light coming into this area, and it's being brought in from the outside. The inner circle here is the Ukrainian and Russian mirroring souls, mirroring entities. The outside circle are all these other sovereign nations that are playing in that space, both for personal gain and for less selfish reasons. And then the outside is the souls, the light energy, the energy that people are bringing to this area to help them together move through the ascension. And at the bottom of that card is a being of light. And that being of light is pushing light up through the center of these mirroring nations, just allowing little cracks of energy to pass through, which is in fact creating lighter specks inside of each of these nations, representing the awakening of souls in each of these areas. So they have to keep replaying these karmic situations together until they are together ready to evolve. And it's one of the reasons that this war feels so archaic. It feels like something that comes from a different time. What sort of nation in 2025 decides to take another nation just because it wants it? It's really hard for certainly the Western nations to really comprehend that. And I'm not trying to get into colonization in this conversation. We could talk about that another time. That is that is a whole nother karmic cycle. But this cycle of owning, of being able to control versus trying to be free, it's this beautiful constant struggle that they have gone through throughout their cycle. The imperial rule that they had, the stuff with the USSR and all of that controlling issue, and where they are now with Putin, they constantly have this fight for freedom. And Russia playing the role of control constantly keeps coming back in and taking and fighting to take back what they feel was a part of their nation. And again, it's just such an archaic concept in today's world. But it's important to understand that what Spirit is saying is that this is a natural or a necessary event to be happening in order to awaken enough souls, both in Ukraine and Russia, to move them out of this karmic cycle, this control and freedom cycle, this us versus them. In order for them to find their sovereignty and true freedom, they have to go through this and awaken at least enough souls that need to awaken in order to move through this cycle together. Really fascinating to see that. I certainly hadn't expected when I pulled up the cards to see mirroring karmic cycles between two countries that had pretty much been struggling since Ukraine separated. But it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense that souls, if you think of the ascension process like planting a seed in the ground, when you plant a seed and you water it and you watch it grow, it's going through the phases of growth, all the way through the phases of death in its cycles. It keeps going through this cycle. As the plant gets stronger, each time it comes back, it's like an immortal cycle. They talk about the tree being immortal. Their seed, their karmic seed for this area of the world was planted together. It was one seed. And at one point, the plant branched off and started growing its own separate way, but there's still one plant. It was still one karmic seed. Ukraine has a lot more love and light support right now, naturally, because of their struggle. And really where they fall in this battle is as the victims, as the people who are fighting to preserve their way of life versus to take. But it is fascinating to see that it can't just split off and form its own plant. It has to come together. They have to essentially come back together like those beautiful, what do they call those? The Oriental love trees, or the money trees that wind together. Ukraine and Russia's cycle are wound together in that manner. One of the imbalances that's happening on a soul level is that love, light, and prayer going solely to the Ukrainian side. And I saw that in the cards as well. The divine feminine, Mary Magdalene, came through on the Ukrainian side, unconditional love, turning into the light of sovereignty. So that unconditional love, allowing their people to wake up and realize their own sovereignty. On the Russian side, there was blindness, confusion, misinformation, and really a muffling of the senses. They feel isolated, they feel lost, and they're not sure why it's happening. I'm talking on the people level. I'm not talking about on the leadership level. Their souls, you can't say, and I certainly can't say, that a soul is bad and it's fucking up everything for everybody else. The war that they're going through is intentional on a soul purpose. It's very clear to see that in order to help both sides evolve. So it would be impossible for me to say Putin's just a dick, regardless of how I feel as Chris. As a soul, I recognize another soul, and he's having his journey. His journey is going to lead to a karmic change. It's giving both countries the opportunity to change karmically and to move up to the next level of ascension. So whether you like the soul or not, it is offering the opportunity for both countries to ascend. So the confusion on the Russian side and them not getting the same support by other souls is an imbalance that we can and need to fix. The light that we send to these areas can't be conditional. Unconditional love to souls, to sovereign entities. If you stripped away every body, the physical essence of each person out there, you're left with energy, souls, made up the exact same energy They're not good, they're not bad. They're energy, they're souls. So for us to pick and choose which side we want to root for is a human decision. If we want to look at this problem as a being of light, as a being of energy, as a soul, then we have to step back from that and say, well, then all of them are souls. They're all sovereign souls. And I'm seeing a very clear disparity in the Russian people, the Russian souls not getting the same support, that Mary Magdalene support. And this divine feminine energy that's coming through very strongly on the Ukrainian side is the warrior energy. One of the things that I have heard in the spiritual communities is that the souls coming back at this time, specifically on the Ukrainian side, is a lot of warrior energy, a warrior soul. Souls who have had lives as warriors are coming back at this time to live through this experience. They're bringing with them the karmic knowledge of battle, of survival, of defense. Some of those souls, and I'm being told this now, some of these souls are souls that came to the US, to America, Northern America, during our separation from Britain, and fought in that battle and have fought in other battles. One of my favorite stories in Michael Newton's book, Journey of the Souls, was about a group of souls, a soul family, that like to come down at times of war. I nicknamed them in my head the party souls, because they didn't come down necessarily to live long lives and have the opportunity to grow in many different ways. They came down to participate in battles, in chaos, in anarchy. That story is coming back into my mind now because that does reflect what is being seen here. These souls aren't frivolous. This is a higher purpose that they feel called to participate in. So there are souls, warrior souls, on both sides of this battle who have come back for this. So that freedom that the Ukrainians are fighting for mirrors the freedom of ascension, the freedom that their souls will gain if they take the opportunity and move through this cycle together with the Russians. How that happens and how that shakes out on the landscape of humans, I don't know. And I didn't ask, because that's not what this is about. This is about understanding on a soul level why it's happening, so that we don't feel fear, so that we don't give into hatred, so that we don't give into that duality, because that is an illusion. There is no us versus them. One of the other things that I saw in the cards was the collective shadow work that this is really bringing to the forefront. Because this war feels so archaic, it creates very clear good guys and bad guys. They're defenders, and then they're the oppressors. It is this great line in the sand that allows us to feel very comfortable supporting one side and hating the other. That is an internal shadow that each of us has to deal with on our own. We have to decide if that is how we want to continue to feel. It's totally a choice. And if that is your choice, that's perfectly fine. That's where your journey is taking you. If you want to move away from that, we have to go through this shadow work, which is acknowledging that both sides are sovereign, and that this inner war for freedom versus control is not really about the Russians and the Ukrainians. It's about humanity. It's about our ability to see each other as sovereign. Because once we do that, there is no control. There's no taking. There's nothing to take. So that is what, as light workers, we are working on internally in order to let go of that need for conflict, for good guys and bad guys. It is a beautiful concept that the media really fuels. especially, and I only have lived in the US, although I've traveled as much as I possibly could. The media in the US is constantly about very clear cut good guys and bad guys. And the bad guys have mustaches and black cowboy hats and they smoke cigars. And when they walk in, it gets darker. It's just very clear cut good guys and bad guys. That is an illusion we can let go of. That is an idea we can let go of. We can let go of victims and victimizers, oppressors, and they're oppressed. Neither sides of those are how I want to identify as a human, let alone as a soul, as a victim or a victimizer. I am neither. I'm a sovereign soul. The same goes for every other soul out there. So really letting go of that narrative. And if those crazy Marvel movies keep popping into my head, the Avengers, very, very clear cut good guys and bad guys. The good guys even look hotter. That's something we can let go. As souls, we are ready to let that go. And one of the ways the cards are saying that we can do that now is to cloak ourselves in it's Christ consciousness. So, and I don't mean that in a religious sense. If you are Christian, if you are Jewish, if you have your beliefs about Jesus Christ, that's not what I'm speaking of. Christ consciousness is the higher consciousness that I talked about. It's an energy that resonates at a higher frequency, a frequency above the physical. So if this is 3D and then there's 4D and 5D, Christ consciousness is up there. And it's a pure essence, the ability to see sovereignty and connect to sovereignty. When we wrap ourselves in this cloak of sovereignty, this cloak of pure light, we're able to move through this narrative of good and bad without letting it hook us in and make us choose sides. Spirituality is not about choosing sides. It's about choosing sovereignty and seeing sovereignty and allowing and just being. So this cloak is called the cloak of Christ. You can see it's actually wrapped around the body and it's blocking out all of the darkness. This is something that we can do in our daily lives as individuals and something that we can do as a collective as well. I do not know where the information originated from, but spiritual channels have found there's a golden grid, a golden energy grid around the planet. Literally these beautiful hexagons and shapes around the planet in this energy grid called the Christ consciousness, something that was laid by Christ's sacrifice and incarnation at that time. One of the reasons that he came down, one of the reasons that Mary Magdalene came down with him was to set up this Christ consciousness. So humans, when incarnated, could tap into this higher energy, this higher consciousness. So this cloak is something that we can wear as individuals, but also reminding us to tap into that Christ consciousness all the time. Whenever we're feeling fear, certainly, whenever we want clarity on information, whenever we're feeling alone, you tap into this grid and it connects you to every other light being on the planet and off the planet. It is a grid of pure light, like a super highway of energy that just connects you immediately to everybody. So I did channel in a meditation when I was doing the cards, and I will post the link here that will be available on my website that connects you into that Christ consciousness grid so you can feel what that's like. During the meditation, I saw specifically over the battlefield, but mostly over the Russian side, was this dome of energy that didn't want to be penetrated. It was like a fog. During the meditation, we intentionally go down and we bust up this dome. This dome was one of the things that was keeping the people inside senseless. meaning their senses were deadened. They couldn't see, they couldn't feel, they couldn't hear what was going on and why this was happening. So we did penetrate that energetic silencer, the dome of silence on top of this battlefield. The powers that be will put it back up. They need their people to remain ignorant in order to keep control. So we have to keep energetically breaking it down to give souls just allowing that light more opportunities to penetrate. The awakening process is an individual process. They have to choose on their own if they're going to, if it's right for them to wake up at this time, or if they will wake up in another lifetime. But we can make the light easier to find, easier to feel. So penetrating that sphere, that bubble, will definitely help them feel connected, to not feel alone, to not feel lost. On both sides, it has to be both sides. These guys are connected, their souls are connected. So it is important to let go of our preconceived notions on these areas and allow them to be. And love both sides unconditionally and send love to both sides unconditionally. So I will end this episode on this beautiful vision where all empires crumble, but consciousness evolves. Just think about that. Every soul in there is going to evolve. It is. It's going to evolve exactly when it's meant to. The nation will crumble. All empires will crumble. In this case, it's giving those souls the opportunity to evolve. So if you have any questions about this, if you want to be a part of this conversation, if you have any feedback, I would love to hear it. Please reach out to me. Go through the website. It has all my links for everything. I hope this helped bring some clarity and some feeling of power for all light beings. We do have a role in this war. We have a role in Gaza. We have a role in the collective consciousness as a whole. That is constantly my message. Play a role. Stand up and play a role. You can bring positive effects to the world. You just got to be willing to stand in your light. So until next time, my beautiful light beings, love and light.